and welcome back to the Shock Absorber podcast. It has been a few weeks as we've been away, a week away and different other things, but we are back, and we are back with the regular gang. Tim and Stu, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's my professional good morning voice.
You've got a professional jacket on?
I have a professional jacket on.
Because you were preparing for
I'm
something
doing
professional?
A wedding. Yes, I'm doing a wedding this afternoon.
Yeah, that's cool.
So this is my professional voice.
Oh, excellent.
It's no different to my normal voice.
It's a bit more measured.
It's a little bit of gravitas.
Oh, do you think so?
Yeah.
That's what I was going for.
That's good. I'm glad you've achieved what you set out to achieve. And Tim, welcome. How are you?
Thank you.
It's been a while since
I'm
you've
also
been
wearing
on.
my formal attire.
Soul Revival jumper.
Yes.
You are on the job.
This is my nice jumper.
It doesn't have any spaghetti stains on it.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. That's good. Stu, quick PhD update. How many words are you up to?
35,000
Out of
80.
Okay.
So I need to do a bit of a spurt in the next few weeks to try and see if I can get over 50.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll probably have broken the back of it if I can do that. So I've got to get all my interviews, and I've got some more interviews to do. So
Okay.
yeah.
There you go. That's exciting. Are you going to keep working on it? We're interested in the final product, which will eventually tell people where it's published, and you can check it out. It'll be quite an achievement once you get it done.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm enjoying it. It's fun.
Yeah, I don't know if I could do a PhD. Yeah, you couldn't. That's what it seemed like.
No, I was just thinking, actually. I think everyone should enjoy trying to keep studying and learning through life. Although Lou said to me the other day, she said, I've been studying for half our marriage. She said, I've studied a lot more than she thought I would. I said, is that been a good thing or a bad thing? And she said, a bit of both.
Okay. That's cool. Any designs on doing a PhD, Tim?
I'd love to do a PhD. Yes. Yep.
On intergenerational ministry or children's ministry or both?
Well, the intersection. So
Yep.
the question is, why is intergenerational church particularly good for childhood faith formation?
Wow.
That's the question.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm not going to answer it right now, if that's all right.
Oh, okay. I was hoping you would, then I wouldn't have to do a PhD. You just let me know.
Well, I keep saying your stuff is so good that I keep reading all the things you publish. I don't have to publish anything, but you encourage me to do something.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely need to publish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why we do this podcast.
Yeah.
I think it's a great thing to do.
Thank you. It was my idea.
It was.
I'll stick with
I
that.
think it was a great idea.
That's my PhD.
If you were going to do a PhD, Joel, what would it be on?
Oh. One thing I was thinking about is that because we've said on the podcast a lot, I'm a fan of motor racing and the influence of World War II on the forming the basis of the motor racing industry after World War II.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah, because
that's great.
all Formula One teams except 2 or 2.5 are based in a very small area around in England.
In England?
Yeah, in England.
I thought McLaren was the only...
Oh no, there's
more than that.
McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes. They're all
Mercedes
They're
are in
all
England.
they're all in
I
England.
thought they were German.
They are, but they bought a team that was originally started in the UK.
Ah, right.
So there's this groundswell of thing of
It's British,
It's
sort of.
It's very British.
What is it about the English that they just want to go around and around really fast?
So a lot of it came out from the World War II airfields. So a lot of
They didn't know what to do with them.
and a lot of the circuits were built around the World War II airfields.
That's very interesting because they did have quite a few of those.
Yes, and obviously they would have built a lot more.
What do you do with all that concrete afterwards, I suppose?
Yep. So Silverstone, where the British Grand Prix is held, it was a World War II airfield.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and the shape of it you can see is actually around the crossing
fascinating.
runways.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what I would probably do.
Good.
I don't know if I'd end up doing it, but
You should.
I like those things. I like finding those things, the influence of things to create something that's been completely different.
Yeah.
And there's always the people that you hear about in motor racing. They're always like, oh, I just love tinkering with stuff. And it's because there's this whole engineering background that came from all the stuff they did in World War II.
Because there's also not that our listeners and viewers would be interested, but there's also a heritage there of the British planes they had in World War II came from the aeroplane racing circuit that they used to have. Because between the wars, they used to have right across Europe and America too, like these international plane racing events, and that's how they kind of came up with the prototype for the Spitfire, because it was a racing plane. Like it was like a Formula One version for planes.
Yep. And that's where Formula One really started in between the 30s and 50s, but then they before the 30s and 40s, and then they stopped because of the war, and then
there you go.
came again. So
Well, that's a lot better use of engineering prowess, isn't it?
Than war, you mean?
Yes.
But there's interesting parallels into the development of that technology moves that fast between like war and like kind of motor racing and that engineering talent, because it's competitive. There's parallels between that as well. That the technology is developed really, really fast as a result. Anyway.
And it sort of ties in with what we're talking about today, because we're talking about how do we use digital communication to communicate the gospel. So
exactly,
that's a pretty cool
link.
Cultural artifact, actually.
It was. We've got another one, but we are going to talk about the theology strategy practice on another ministries on our service teams. We're going to do communications, which is close to my area of sphere of influence, I would say, maybe not area of expertise. But before we do that, and it's kind of related to communications, is the Sydney Sweeney genes controversy. If you haven't seen it, it's an ad, and we can chuck it in actually.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has great genes.
Would you call it an it girl, or is she a blonde bombshell, or what would you describe her as? I think she's the next big actor.
Right. I mean, I don't think I've seen her in anything, unless she has been, and I haven't noticed. I didn't really know who she was. I've seen the name kind of pop around. That's just because I'm old.
Times that by 2.
That's real old.
So the little bit I picked up, that seems to be the case. Yes, sort of the latest it girl.
I'm trying to remember this show that Euphoria is where she really gained a name. But she's in, interestingly, we talk about how technology has influenced what we consume. She's been in Handmaid's Tale, Euphoria, and White Lotus, which are 3 really big shows, TV shows though. But now she's becoming a movie star as well. But this is an American Eagle ad for jeans. And there's been some controversy around it because it's playing on the idea of genes and genetics, and genes is in the genes that you wear.
Because they say Sydney Sweeney has good genes. Is that the byline?
Genes are passed down, and my genes are blue because the genes are blue. However, some people are saying there are racial connotations to it, and I don't know what you think about that. We're just commenting on what... It's interesting that people can get so fired up about something like this, and really the company... It's working well for the company because it's courting a lot of controversy. It reminds me of the American Apparel ads, where they would create quite racy ads, but they would do it on purpose and create a lot of controversy around it, and it ended up becoming a bigger company because of that actual approach to advertising. It was guerrilla advertising, you could call it.
Guerrilla advertising.
Well, guerrilla.
Tell me more about what that is. What's guerrilla advertising?
Well, the reason I know about it is because Ryan Holiday was the director of marketing at the time. Ryan Holiday, we've talked about before, is a stoic writer, and talks about, he's a prolific author now, but he would he learnt how to hijack that early phase of the internet for controversy around, especially because websites such as the Huffington Post, what's the other one? They've kind of just disappeared now, but the ones that made a lot of money from clicks and advertising clicks.
BuzzFeed.
Was that one?
BuzzFeed, and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't seen BuzzFeed for years.
Yeah, because they've kind of gone out. And Gawker was another one, which, funny enough, Ryan Holiday wrote a story about how Hulk Hogan and Peter Thiel brought down Gawker. Anyway, he was coming up at a time where you could generate a lot of controversy by just basically calling up a reporter and saying, they put up a bad ad, a supposedly bad ad, and then they call up a reporter and tell them how upset they were about it, but it was them that actually put the ad up, for example. So they would generate this controversy online, first version of it was probably pre-mobile internet. And so people would and then they would feed off that story. So one person would write the story, but then it was an idea of how quickly can we get it to our other subsidiaries or even different news sites so we can generate more money, generate more clicks, because journalists, they still are at the time, were often paid by how many people clicked on this story.
Yep.
So the more controversial, more racy, more salacious you could make your story, the more clicks you would get on it, because that's what would fund the advertising revenue of these newer media companies like Huffington Post and BuzzFeed.
Yep.
But it's not really a new concept.
Well, I was going to say, so I mean, yeah, the very way you talk about it shows that this is not a new thing in any way. Like, I mean, the whole idea that sex sells is a very old concept. And the fact that you would, the sort of the blonde bombshell kind of character in these advertisements is definitely not a new concept. And so, yeah, and also that whole controversy point. Like, it's not like American were caught off guard and go, oh, is there a double meaning to jeans? Oh, sorry, we didn't realise. It's like, clearly they courted the controversy. They wanted this to blow up in that same Ryan Holiday kind of way. Yeah. So, yeah, and also it's just, what is maybe newer now is the attention economy that we talk about, and the fact that we are generating clicks and views, and you get noticed in this moment. For this week. I mean, by the time this comes out, we probably even stop talking about it. It'll be old news, because the attention economy moves so fast through these things. And works on outrage as well. Wants to make people upset, so they've baited outrage intentionally, so that they'll get their particular moment in the sun. And I mean, it seems to be by reports it's going well for American Eagle's financial prospects. So I mean, from a business marketing perspective, it's worked. It's done exactly what they wanted it to do.
And I wouldn't be. I mean, I don't know if this is for sure, but it's kind of like Ryan Holiday, he wrote, what is it? His book is Confessions of a Media Manipulator. That they've done this to create controversy and then driven the controversy around it.
Oh, absolutely. Well. Yeah.
But it's interesting that we sometimes, do we want to believe that, or we don't want to understand that actually might be the case? What do you think, Stu? I'm interested in your take on this. Do we want to believe that people have those nefarious ideals behind creating controversy?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's that old adage that all publicity is good publicity. So sometimes controversy has driven marketing. When Monty Python brought out Life of Brian, all the Christian demonstrations against Life of Brian actually pushed the sales of that movie and gave it more publicity. So lots of publicity is sometimes seen as a good thing. It's funny though, because in the modern world of the internet, you've got some advertising campaigns that cause controversy that fail and some that succeed. So you've got like the CEO of Jaguar has just resigned recently. Apparently he's retired, but there's talk about the fact that the big rebrand that Jaguar has just done, where they've started again, completely wiped their history of all the James Bond kind of middle-aged men wearing tweed jackets driving around in British racing green. Jaguars through the countryside.
We talked about that, didn't we?
Sean Connery.
A little bit, I think.
They've tried to kind of start again because obviously that generation's, but they went full electric. They, made real colourful and all that. So apparently they sold 42 cars in the last 6 months in Europe or something. So that's not been a great sales run.
Wow.
No.
So that didn't work. And then there was the Dylan Mulvaney controversy.
Oh, with Bud.
With Bud Light. That seemed to tank their brand. But that, again, was like a controversial ad that was trying to...
And they went the completely other way. We're getting Shane Gillis, the comedian, to now
promote
their brand.
Yeah. So there is this left-right paradigm that is interesting to watch. Some commentators are saying that's shifting, some aren't.
But that's also the best way to generate controversy is to, own the libs or to bait the right or whatever. Like that's how you generate the controversy is to actually intentionally throw out something that that because of the polarization, if you just need a little bit of a sniff of something and the other side is going to overreact because that's our attention-seeking economy. And so, I mean, I think this is the Dylan Mulvaney thing didn't go the way that they thought it would go, and whereas this one seems to have done exactly what they wanted in terms of getting enough controversy to blow up. And so as we talk about communication, like it is communicating the brand, it's communicating a story in just the way that they want.
And I think the brand with American Eagle is aimed at their customer base, whereas both those other examples we talked about was trying to change the customer base.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the
that's
Bud Light
good.
crew, who were all drinking beers at the football, they didn't dig the commercial, but I suppose not enough people from the left wanted to jump onto that brand to make it worth their while. So same with Jaguar, there wasn't that kind of their traditional market just didn't want to have a bar of it, so they kind of lost their market. Whereas American Eagle have lent right into the kind of the thing there. It's interesting that Beyonce's done a ad for Levi jeans, and Levi jeans is more of I think commentators would argue they're a bit more left leaning as a company, and so they're leaning into that.
I did read that Lizzo has already released a song commenting on that has a comment in the song about
it,
the actual jeans ad.
It's so rapid, isn't it? With
That's
technology,
the thing, isn't it?
And that's why it's relevant for today, because you can have an ad come out, and next minute you've got a song about it that's come out within a week.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing that Lizzo has jumped onto the controversy to give her 2 cents in it, which anyone can obviously, but there's also this element of like, well, there's some controversy, let's like ride the wave. That's the other thing that you have to be aware of, I think. One more question before we kind of get into what we were going to talk about. Do you think as Christians we should either be more aware of this kind of media manipulation and what happens, or do we just choose to avoid it? Because I'm thinking of the Andy Crouch's work, issue of like, do we critique it? Do we consume it? Do we actually create our own? How do you think we should respond as Christians as this kind of thing happens?
Well, I think what we've been saying over a while now is that we, in the midst of all this content creation, we create our own content and create our own culture, particularly at the local area, but being conscious of the fact that no local area is impervious to international influences. So globalism is such now that technological communication and advances in digital technology mean that every person on earth almost is aware of what's happening outside of their immediate context. So I think as Christians we do live in a world that's incredibly connected. I think that, as we've said before, and Andy Crouch has mentioned this, that some people try and jump onto that bandwagon and go with that culture. Some people decry it and say we shouldn't have anything to do with it. Other people try and critique it, I suppose kind of like we're doing today. But the real gospel, well, the heart of the gospel is to share the message of the good news within the context that we're in. And so I think sometimes there'll be opportunities for us using digital technology to actually get the controversial message of the gospel out, because actually the message of the gospel is far more controversial than anything we've talked about today. So, yeah, I mean, maybe not more controversial. I mean, this whole Sydney Sweeney argument is all about genetics and eugenics, and is it a harking back to a racist past, and there's all these really deep arguments going on around a commercial. But I think it's getting eyeballs, and people are interested in talking about things more and more these days. I think we've talked in a previous podcast about long form podcasts that still have a place, not for everybody, but people really do want to think deeply about what's happening in the world that we're in. And if we can bring the light of the gospel to bear on that, I think that's exciting. My friend Tom Morgan in England, who's leading Light Church in Swindon, he was saying to me on the phone the other day that across England they're just amazed at how many young people are starting to come back to church, and they're calling it a quiet revival. They're not sure if it's going to last or whatever, but he said in his new church plant that he's just set up, he's had some young adults come to church who have been thinking about the gospel because they've seen a Christian content on TikTok, gone and bought themselves a Bible, and then rocked up to church to ask Tom if he could help them to read it because they don't know how to read it. So that's pretty exciting. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's also not all beer and Skittles either.
What's interesting, the gospel is, and this is a great segue, I just want to get Tim's thoughts on that too, but the gospel is still alive and active, isn't it? Whether it's online or it's people just going to buy a Bible because they've seen it on TikTok and then they need to chat about it and understand how to read it and know what it's saying.
And it's interesting, the impulse to go and be with people in the flesh. It's really interesting that you might come up with an idea online, but you still want to meet with someone like Tom. Can you help me to read this? I think that's really exciting.
Tim, your thoughts on, we're talking about Christians understanding that this is kind of happening in media?
Yeah, I think it is important that we are aware of these things. I think there's two things going through my mind. One is that, yes, it's good to be aware that, obviously media manipulation happens and all these kinds of different stories. The other thing that's in my mind because of an article I read this week is just how much time we give to the attention economy and these kinds of fast-moving trends. And I read an article, we can put in the show notes. It's called "The War on Attention is a Spiritual War," by a guy called Ben Crosby, who's seems to be an Anglican minister in Canada. But there's a quote here: "It's a problem that is facing us in new ways, with the best of human ingenuity currently being deployed precisely to make it harder for us to attend to and thus love God and neighbour in an undistracted way." I don't think it's intentional that Meta and TikTok engineers are sitting in their offices thinking, let's make it harder for Christians to pray. But their attempt to monetize our attention has, I think, exactly this effect. We need to recognise that the platforms and technologies are not neutral, that our ready addiction to them is not accidental, but by design. And they are set up in a way that makes our Christian life more difficult. And so that's my other thing in terms of these kind of, controversies that come and go in a fairly rapid cycle. And I think it's, while we need to be aware of how media is manipulated and the stories are told and those kinds of things, I think there might also be a wisdom of actually being disconnected and not knowing about these things, that there might be perhaps that there's a spiritual discipline of being uninterested in the latest things, in terms of, if that means that you're actually using your time, you can be uninterested and be still wasting your time. But if our love for God and love for neighbour is coming at the expense of not being up to date on, these kind of fast moving TikTok trends, that's probably a good thing. But again, just trying to work out the balance of those kinds of things.
It's like a toss-up between, like, what is your sphere of influence take into as well? Like, where can you be influential, hopefully for God's glory as well? Because I was having a discussion with my kids on the way home from swimming, actually, the other night, and they were talking about, like, my son asked me a question, what do you think is, like, popular now as technology, but will be, like, in a few years' time, just won't even matter? That was the question he asked. I'm like, I'm not sure, because we were talking about AI. I still don't know what the answer to that question is, but we were talking about how AI is really interesting, and I've been looking at a lot of different AI kind of modes, or like things like Notebook LLM, and I found another one called Lex, which actually helps you write, but it gives you feedback as you are writing, like an article or something. So it's not writing the article for you. You write something and then you say, help me understand this better, give me feedback on what else I should be putting in. And it says, try connecting the idea differently, and then you try and do it yourself. So it's interesting how people are using it differently. But I said, the one thing that I've kind of picked up from talking to you guys on this podcast is that technology is always changing and always increasing in what it's going to supposedly benefit for us. But we had washing machines and dishwashers come in, and that was going to give us a whole lot of time. And in the end, it really just freed up time to fill it with more other things. I think it's saying the same thing with AI. But the one thing it does miss, I suppose, is that we are built in the image of God, and we are made for relationship. And that's the interesting thing, when you were saying those guys in England, is that their initial impulse is to go and talk to someone about it. And I think that's what's really interesting. And now we're about to get into talking about communications, is how do we create Christian content? This is my thought a lot of the time now, is how do we create Christian content that is going to bring people to God, glorify God, but then also not be the main way that people are getting to know God, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's a difficult line to tread a lot of the time, because there's a lot of, like, online pastors, there's people doing podcasts that are Christian podcasts, there's ones that are more controversial than others. I think there's a Christian comedian, John Christ, he does a podcast, and they look at funny videos and they kind of poke fun at Christians. So part of me is like, I understand that we're poking fun at Christians, but should we be doing that? So there's so much into that. Stu, when we talk about theology of communications, where's a good starting point? I'm sure you're going to say the Bible, but
God.
God.
God, the Bible, Jesus.
Yeah.
Genesis 1:3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So God created through his word. So God is a God who also reveals himself to us. Hebrews 1:1-2, long ago at many times and in many ways God spoke, but in these last days he has spoken through his Son. So God's ultimate self-revelation is in his Son Jesus. He's the incarnate word from John 1:1 and 14. And so I think communication is actually at the heart of creation, and it's the heart of the relationship that we have with God. And so when we look at digital communication, I think that that's in the background, that our God is a God who speaks. And when we speak, we are actually engaging in what he's called us to do and partner with him as he continues to share the good news through the Great Commission. 2 Timothy 3:16 says that the Bible isn't just a record of God's actions, it's actually God's word. And so God, through his Holy Spirit, has inspired people throughout history to write down his word, and then he's also protected that word through history so that we can have it in our present day. And so I think the implication for digital communication is that we are seeking to share the message of Jesus and the message that we are all sinners and we need a saviour. And so that, I think, for me is the big picture helicopter view of communications as I kind of come to it to start off with.
Tim, thoughts?
Oh, yes. No, I affirm all of those things. Yeah, the fact that God is a communicating God. And I think the other link there is the Great Commission. You know, Jesus explicitly communicates and to the disciples, go on communicating. You know, to be the ones who go out and to share the truth of love in Jesus. It's one of our phrases. At Soul Revival, so to go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them everything I've commanded you. So you have, that requires communication. And so, you know, from a broad topic, we are to go out and do those things. And what you have seen over the last 2,000 years since Jesus has given that command is Christians have often been at the forefront of communication technology, because there is this desire to use any means available to communicate the word. So, scrolls and letters, obviously from Paul's day onwards, collected codexes and books that, putting together. The monasteries were, the ones who kind of held a lot of the knowledge. So because they were writing and transcribing and copying and to using that. The preached word has been very important, reading God's word. So all of these are communicative things. Gutenberg with the printing press, I don't know if it was the first, but one of the first things was the Bible.
It was the first book that was printed using movable metal type.
Yep. Okay. And then and that was happening at the time around the Reformation. And so you've got a lot of the reformers and proto-reformers who are using printing press technology to distribute. So when, Martin Luther nails his 99 Theses to the wall, it's a very short matter of time, for modern day in time scale, for those 99 Theses to be distributed around Germany and beyond, because they're able to print at large scale, communicate at large scale. So the message goes out. In the 20th century, you've got radio preachers and then eventually television preachers, and so you've got internet preachers and TikTok preachers. Like Christians have always been there, using technologies and anything to try and be faithful to that Great Commission, to actually be going out and telling people about Jesus and discipling people in Jesus. One of the interesting things that we can probably throw into that mix, though, and maybe something just to sort of slow down on, is the Marshall McLuhan idea that the medium is the message, and what happens when the technology itself, or the technologies themselves are not value free. and I think this is Marshall McLuhan was big on this. Neil Postman with his Amusing Ourselves to Death was big on this when he was talking about the television in the 1980s, is the way that we receive information actually affects the information itself. And so that's an interesting thing to, so I think it is good that Christians have always been open to use technology, but that's not a neutral process. And sometimes it comes at a cost. And I think it's always good to try and be alert to and wise to what might some of the costs be of the way that we are communicating.
It's kind of like, I remember we've talked, and this is probably a later in terms of practice, but you talked about sometimes how discipleship and mission has been exported off the local gathering. And people say that there was times where you've experienced people saying, I'm evangelising my friends at the pub, but they end up being evangelised by the pub themselves. And it's similar to the content or even whatever we're watching, we actually consume, is that if we're not kind of thinking about even what Andy Crouch talks about, they can just easily permeate our teaching, and often it's not really trying to do anything to perhaps forward God's kingdom, right? Do you feel like, because that's, again, how do we, the question I suppose is that if we are consuming things on our phone or on our TVs, how do we use the Bible as a lens to actually go, this is what we should be watching, or even this is maybe something I should not be watching? Or also, in what way can we turn that around and go, or how do we use this as kind of how we just did with the Sydney Sweeney example, is how do we put a Christian context on that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a negative and a positive attribute to the digital communication that we're talking about. And the positive is that for many decades, Christians in the West, particularly in our context, have been consumers of Christianity. So they'll go to church and they'll consume the service, they'll consume the Bible teaching. But I think one of the positives of digital communication is that more people can create content. So once upon a time, people who were going to church didn't really have a voice unless they, I suppose, wrote a pamphlet or they wrote a book or something, which would take a lot of effort, cost a lot of money, and it would be really difficult to crack into the institutional forms of communication that was set up. Most Christians who go to church couldn't access the opportunity to create content on television or movies, because those kinds of technologies had institutional barriers, and they also had a great deal of cost associated with creating content. But put a microphone in front of someone with a camera on their computer and they can create content, both musical or spoken word, or make little movies. All the fan movies that are coming out around Star Wars are a good example of that, and Batman and things like that. So with AI, that opportunity for people to create their own content is only going to escalate, and it's going to become more and more. So in a way, one of the positive things I see with digital communication is it gives more opportunity for Christians to actually be content creators, to actually be practically engaged in discipleship and mission. Because I think one of the unforeseen outcomes of some of our forms of church, where church is an event where you go along and you are spoken at, you sing, but there's a group of people who are the professional singers at the front that kind of lead you in that singing. It's a little bit like that you're used to going to church like you'd go to the movies, and you go watch a movie that somebody else had created. And I wonder if that had an impact on Christians' voice, that maybe Christians didn't experiment with their voice in church unless they were a Bible study leader, or unless they were in a musical context or leading a service. There's only a few of the Christians in the church that had an opportunity to have a voice in the leadership structures of the parish council, etc. I wonder if there's been some atrophy of the Christian voice in recent decades, where Christians have not been practiced in how to disciple one another, how to carry one another's burdens from Galatians 6, how to build one another up. It's pretty hard to build one another up over a cup of tea, 15 minutes, until people, after a service you have coffee or tea for 15 minutes and you talk about what you're going to do next mainly. It's pretty hard to develop the skill of discipleship in that context. So also mission, I think a lot of Christians lost their confidence about missional engagement. So the positive thing about digital communication is it's giving Christians an opportunity to experiment, and even teenagers and children are doing their own little videos on YouTube and things like that. I don't know if it's still going, but I remember thinking how fun it was to see young people creating content when YouTube first started. So yeah, I think creating the opportunity for people to speak again and have a voice, not that we have to wait for somebody else to reflect our voice through Christian music or through Christian authors, I think is a positive. The negative is what you talked about earlier, that some of those Christian voices that we watch, we actually end up just becoming consumers of more voices. That's probably the baseline. So there is a potential that people aren't actually using this technology to create an opportunity for them to disciple and mission people, but they're actually listening to others who are having a go. And because there is such a broad group of people speaking on the internet, there is the potential for your favourite podcaster is someone who's laughing at Christians.
Yep.
And so you're actually engaging in behaviour that's not edifying, and it's definitely not building other people up. It's actually tearing them down, which isn't actually in line with the heart of Jesus, which is compassionate and kind. And looking at the fruit of the Spirit, I don't see paying out other people in the fruit of the Spirit. But an online presence should reflect the fruit of the Spirit. So Galatians 5:22-23 is almost like a verse that maybe every podcaster should put right in front of them every time they go online, because if they were doing that, they're wanting to be reflecting the love of the Father rather than just getting clicks for themselves so that they can have a voice and have power in that. And one of the things I do worry about, just briefly, the problem with all new technologies is they have negative consequences no matter how good they are.
You don't see them for a while.
Yeah, and some people just talk about the positive or they just talk about the negative. But I think you've got to hold those two things in tension. That's why I started with some of the positive things. I'm sure there's others as well. But one of the negative things to keep in mind is power, that people want power. And our sinful nature desires autonomy, and it desires for our voice to be stronger and over the top of other people's voices. And so a lot of this content from people analysing Sydney Sweeney, all these other things, is they're also looking for the power of being a shaper of people's views, not just sharing their views or not pointing them to Jesus. And even Christians can be caught up in that power motif where, as Machiavelli says, that we're all looking for an opportunity to direct and influence things from our own point of view. So I think that is a danger, and I think that the accountability, though, is in its public nature. So there's so much stuff out there in public that people can talk about it. And so rather than just critiquing culture, I think what we're trying to do is work out how are we accountable to each other as we try and be priests, actually, of God as Christians, that we're the priesthood of all believers. We're representing God in everything we do. So how do we do that online? I think that's a really good way to look at it.
Tim, you got any thoughts about that accountability thing? I thought you make a face that made it look like yes. I like that.
Yeah, I think the accountability thing, yes. Going back to a little bit earlier what you said, we've talked about this before, but I mean the great thing about internet is that everyone can create content. So there's a democratization of
no gatekeepers.
The bad thing about the internet is everyone can create content, and the democratization, which and it's not just problematic because it means that there's a lot of dumb stuff out there. And we talked about brain rot a couple of months back. So it's not just that there's dumb stuff, but there's putting stuff out there. I'm reflecting on the James passage where he says, not many of you should become teachers because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly.
Right.
And I'm just thinking particularly in the Christian world, a lot of opinion makers and people making podcasts and TikTok videos and things, and there can be a helpfulness to that. But all of that is, to the broad definition, teaching in some ways. And I worry about the malformation that can come not just from those who are listening, but from those who are actually putting themselves in a position of teacher, creator, influencer, who have no accountability. So it comes back to the accountability thing of there are people out there who have no training, no discipleship, no mentorship, no accountability. And I think, again, part of our cultural moment is, hooray, we've thrown off all shackles of authority. We've overthrown the authority of institutions. We've overthrown, isn't it wonderful, the democratization of all things? And I actually don't think that's not a biblical thing.
Very individualistic.
It's very individualistic, but even the idea that the Bible talks a lot about the weighty responsibility of leadership. You read through Ephesians that God gives the church pastors, teachers, apostles, preachers. I've got that order wrong, but you get the verse. Ephesians 4, for the sake of raising up the church to do ministry and to mature into that. God gives leadership, so leadership is not wrong. Accountability is not wrong. Paul's got very strong words in both Timothy's and Titus about the types of people you would put into leadership positions, the type of character they would be, and the responsibilities that they have. And so this is, riffing off some of Tom Holland's stuff about, the Christianized West has got to this place where we've got this democratization of all things. But also we end up sometimes with a perverted version of that as well. That the person with absolutely no accountability, no mentorship, no training, is just as much discoverable on one of these platforms as someone who has deep discipleship, deep training, deep mentorship, deep accountability. And this is where the medium is the message, this idea that they're side by side and you as the consumer are not told to distinguish between those two voices. And I think there's something problematic about that in terms of the formation and what it actually looks like for us to be consuming those kinds of content. And also this is what Postman was getting on to about television in the 80s was, you're watching one channel and you're watching a sermon, then you flick channels and you're watching Bold and the Beautiful, and you flick one channel and you're watching the news, and you flick another channel, and the way that we're consuming Christian content is the same platform that we're using for dopamine relief and using for Italian brain rot. And so I'm flicking through, and somewhere in there, I come across a TikTok Christian influencer. Now, again, by God's grace, people are responding, and as our friend Tom Morgan is finding, people are becoming Christians because they've seen something on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and then are coming to the church. So God can be at work, but I think it's also good to be wise to what are these technologies doing and how are they shaping and forming us as well. So that's just kind of playing with all the mix of these ideas. It's complex, right?
Yeah, really complex. To add another complexity into there, Stu, you do enjoy looking at movements and grassroots movements. I was going to see if you thought that something like, as we're talking about digital communication today, do you think that there is an element that it can open up, and kind of in contrast to the professionalism part that you were talking about before, do you think there's an element that it can open up church as a grassroots movement again? Because I'm thinking about how a lot of our ministry right now has been shaped by what we did during COVID, and we were able to freely express a lot of things and experiment because of a number of things that we've talked about in terms of theology and strategy that allowed us to be flexible in our practice, and we had to go online. And I think it was your idea when A Week Away was cancelled to do it as a podcast format, and then that kind of played out into it being our church services for a long time during that lockdown in 2021. So I'm just trying to think, is this element of, can we see digital communication as churches as a grassroots movement in order to speak more confidently as Christians, or create that Christian culture that we've been speaking of today?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. So individuals are driven by meaning, and so people get their meaning from all sorts of different places, but we get our meaning from the gospel. So the gospel gives us meaning because it's actually God speaks to us and tells us who he is, and then who are we in light of who he is. So when Jesus comes in Mark chapter 1 verse 14-15, he says, I have come to bring the kingdom, repent and believe the good news. He initiates an opportunity for us to have meaning in our life that's based on him, and that we can actually have an identity that comes from that meaning. So we are children of God because of what Jesus has done for us. That Ephesians 2, once we were dead in our transgressions, but now we've been made alive in Christ. And so now there's no longer Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, in the sense that we're all one in Christ, so that we actually belong to a new family. So the identity we have in Christ creates a subculture. And then the interesting thing about that subculture is that subculture itself then perpetuates meaning. So that then, for example, the subculture gathers in church and it sits around as we have someone preach to us from the Bible, and then that creates more understanding, more meaning, that creates more identity, and so on and so on. So subcultures grow like that, not just Christian subcultures, but all subcultures. So, for example, the rock and roll subculture, teenage subculture, actually grew out of the 50s from America, and it was schools that actually gave people their teenage meaning, because they started spending most of their time together as teenagers rather than spending their time with their family. So the more schools got organised and started to educate teenagers, they created meaning for those teenagers, and then those teenagers got identity out of being a teenager, and then they created a subculture of rock and roll, which created artifacts that then created meaning. So, for example, the first movie that really brought teenage culture to Australia was Blackboard Jungle, which was Bill Haley and the Comets' Rock Around the Clock song came out, and then a whole generation of young Australians jumped onto that bandwagon and started writing their own songs, and that created an Australian subculture, and so on and so on. So when it comes to church, I think there's a sedentariness at the moment within our Western churches. It appears to me that we consume church, and we're quite individualistic when it comes to church, because there was a conscious decision in the 80s and 90s from Christian leaders across the West to create a really professionalised form of church. So particularly leaders like Bill Hybels from Willow Creek, he had a youth group in the 70s that grew massive in a cinema, and then he planted a church out of that in Chicago, and then that church became a mega church. And his big idea was, people aren't going to church in the 60s and 70s because it's old-fashioned, so let's create a vibrant, professional, new face for Christianity. And he went so far as to actually distinguish between discipleship and evangelism within his church services. So he said the Sunday service isn't about discipleship at all. It's going to be only a seeker service for those who aren't Christians, and we're going to have plays, we're going to have fun, and we're going to sing songs that people would hear on the radio. And all these people came to church to listen to this, and in inverted commas, hopefully non-Christians would become Christians, but they were actually creating a new kind of Christianity amongst the Christians who went to church for that seeker level service, which was a very thin veneer on the top of what the depth of a discipling reality should look like. And then on Wednesday nights, they used to have what they called I can't remember what they call them now, but they were like a discipleship service, and that was where you do your meaty teaching. But they never found that they got as many people going to that service as they did the Sunday. So you actually have that exported across the world. In the early 90s, Willow Creek had, down at Darling Harbour in Sydney, they booked out the entertainment centre, which was one of the biggest venues in Sydney, and they had, maybe not that many, maybe 20,000 leaders come, and everyone was trying to work out how to do that in Australia. So the Willow Creek Association invited me to speak at one of their conferences actually in the 90s to talk about how we can make seeker-sensitive youth ministry. And I was supposed to be the local practitioner who was engaging with teenage surfers and skaters, and everyone should look like this young guy Stu with his purple hair and his skater clothes and his punk attitude. And it was a fun day actually. There was this conference I went to. There was a lot of people there, and that was an interesting world to look at, because what I think was a bit jarring for me that day was I came to talk about costly discipleship, but they were kind of talking about seeker-sensitive discipleship, and I was too young to know the difference, what was really going on there. Where was I going with that, Joel? I can't remember. What was the question?
Grassroots movement.
Oh yeah, so with the grassroots, it depends what kind of grassroots movements we get. If it's local churches taking on that seeker-sensitive services, it might lead to shallow discipleship and shallow evangelism, but local communities that are actually activating as subcultural realities that are perpetuating the meaning of the gospel and helping people to form an identity in Christ, not as an identity of a particular brand of Christianity, but helping people to see Jesus. I think that's really important. And I think the final thing I'd say about that is that will actually really engage a lot of people, because Jesus himself said they'll know you're my disciples if you love one another, for example. So there's a lot written in sociological writings at the moment about racism, for example, and how it's really interesting that a number of scholars are talking about the solution to racism is local church action. So the church is a local church action group. It's a subcultural identity that can perpetuate a non-racist meaning and give people an identity beyond their skin colour. And because they don't have an identity of their race and their skin colour, they're actually able to contribute to a more inclusive subculture. Really briefly, in 2004 or 5, whenever the Cronulla riots were, the day before the Cronulla riots, we had a Soul Revival hip-hop night where we had all these artists from all over Sydney come to the Shire to have a concert. We had people of Middle Eastern background, we had Aboriginal people, we had Shire crew, and we had people who had Asian background, all at this concert, and there was about 150 young people there or something like that. Anyway, I remember really distinctly people's phones started buzzing. And now back in the day before iPhones, they were, just the messages coming up on the phones where you had
on your Nokia.
Your Nokia, your Nokia phone. Yeah. And all these phones were buzzing, and people are saying, apparently there's going to be, everyone's going down to Cronulla. Well, they're asking everyone to go down to Cronulla to kick the Muslims off the beaches, and they're going to have a riot. I don't think they call it a riot. I think they call it something else. And I remember us all laughing, going, as if there's going to be something like that happen. Look at tonight. How good is this? There's like all these different cultures all here together. And yet the next day there were thousands of people down the beach to try and kick the Muslims off the beaches. And they use violence and intimidation and thuggery to try and stop people of certain racial backgrounds coming to enjoy the beaches at the Shire. The week after that, we went down to the beach and had a prayer vigil and wrote something on the sand. I can't remember what we wrote. Jesus, probably. And we again had all those people who came that night. Some of them came back so we could have a public demonstration of our unity on the beach around Jesus. Now, in one way, some people might say, that's done nothing. What did that do? But it meant something to the people who were there the night before the riots. And none of our young people from our church went down to those riots. And so we, as a subculture, were able to stand against that racism. And if you get lots and lots of small groups of people standing against racism, then you'll deal with racism. So that small effort that we go to each week to gather around the meaning of the gospel, to reaffirm our identity as Christians, to invite other people to come and hear that message and meet Jesus and be a part of the subculture that he creates amongst us, I think is still the most exciting way to influence the world for the kingdom.
I think we'll leave it at that for this episode. Thank you very much, guys, talking about the theology of communications. It's been a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do this again. But we'll talk about strategy, which will mean is generationality, friendship, and how we do that in a communication space. So that'll be fun. Yeah,
third place theory has third space theory too, which people might want to look up online. Yeah, which is about how do you do can you do third place online?
Yeah, so. And I think we're still exploring that. I think we did do it a little bit during COVID.
We tried, didn't we?
Yeah, we tried, but not. Well, that's another thing we start talking about is that people wanted to come back to church. They didn't.
Nothing
they wanted
replaces face.
Yeah, they wanted to be in relationship with each other and being close. So that will come out obviously in the next few episodes as well. But for now, thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
for everyone listening and or watching. We're back online, as you would have noticed, because you're listening to this or watching it. You can email me, joel@shockabsorber.com.au, if you would like to discuss anything that we're talking about or chuck a comment in our YouTube channel. Having said that, we appreciate you listening and being part of this podcast for today, and we'll always finish with one way.
One way.